Hi, like they already said, I'm Jonas. I'm been working here for the last 7 years at Studio Dott. Like Peter said, we have a lot of skills here in-house. I'm responsible for the digital team the last couple of years, and that's also in that case that I'm talking here today. I'm born in Waregem, and like many other West Flemish people, I ended up living in Ghent and working in Antwerp. So I'm a what do you say, how do you call it, a multi-city person or something like that. In the beginning, I studied industrial design. That's product design, like they have in Kortrijk, but industrial design in, product design in Antwerp, and it's called industrial design in Kortrijk. It's quite similar. But the most important thing that I learned there, because that's very physical product oriented, that I learned there just design thinking, and that it's important to just look at problems and try to solve them. And whatever the solution may be, sometimes it's a physical product, sometimes it's a digital one, sometimes it's a service, sometimes it's an interior, and that's how we ended up here, because we have all those skills in-house, so we are able to solve almost every problem. And because this is quite boring, I thought maybe fun fact that I'm always into seafood. But don't talk about seafood anymore. I think maybe we are now 20. So in 2010, I had to make an important decision, like many of us. I had to choose what I wanted to do for a study. So I doubted a lot between, on one hand, architecture, and on the other hand, I wanted to do product design. One was in busy Ghent, and the other one was in Kortrijk. But I finally decided to do product design. Never really regretted my choice, but for one case, it would be handy if I had chosen for architecture, because when I try, and I had to put a picture of me with my mother, of my colleagues in it, so I quickly skip it, no. But in one case, it would be very interesting to be architect, but because then you say, I'm an architect and everybody knows what you do. It's like being a doctor or a teacher or a dentist or a lawyer. Everybody knows, okay, that's a job. But with digital design or UX design, or how do we all call it, it's quite difficult to explain it. So I tried to use a lot of words which are, I think, known for everybody here, but if I tell those words to my mother, she's only getting more confused. So that was a bad practice, and I ended up making more confusion. So I had to try another method. So finally, I ended up that, my family, my friends don't know what I actually do. Some think that I'm a programmer, others think that I'm just creative and doing visual stuff. I'm frustrated, at the other hand, that nobody knows what I'm actually doing. But one of the important things that I learned was also that a lot of clients don't actually know what to expect about a designer in the beginning. So in a lot of talks in the pre-sales phase or even at the kickoff, it's important that we can tell what the designer or the role of a designer is in a project. So I had to look for a way to explain it, and that came back to my initial choice in 2010. And I realized that there are a lot of resemblances between architecture and product design. So I used that metaphor the last years and tried to explain via that metaphor to my mother what I actually do. And it somehow worked. So I thought maybe this is an interesting case to explain it to other people who have the same problem, I hope. Because it's a UX talk, I thought I had to add Don Norman, then I look smart, because otherwise it's not an UX talk. But the most important thing was that I saw that there's already architect in the name when he invented the term of UX designer back in 1995. But I just added this because I really understand that a lot of people don't know what UX design is, because it's quite new. I'm actually older than the job is, so that was quite interesting. And then to make it even more historical, I added Vitruvius. Everybody knows Vitruvius, I think. Me neither. But it's because when I tried to find a method to explain the comparison between architecture and product design, I found out that there is actually the three principles of architecture, and that's the first one is that a building should be beautiful and it should bring delight to people. On the other hand, and that's the foundation of it, because if you don't have those two, beautiful doesn't mean anything. You have useful, your building should be useful and should have, it should be well designed so that if you build a library, for example, you can find books in it. And on the other hand, we have durable, so it should last more than a lifetime. So this is from the Roman time, so a lot of those buildings are still here. So I thought this was interesting. Also, when you remove one of the three things, then if you remove usefulness of a design, you end up with useless design. I don't know if it's visible, but it's a door for wheelchair people without, with stairs in front of it. If you remove the durability of a building so that it doesn't last a very long time, it's an example of Ghent, but the Rabot Towers, there are many examples, I think, also in other cities. But in the 70s, they built a lot of buildings which are now demolished because they don't fit in the way we currently live in. And if we remove the beautifulness of buildings, then we have a lot of beautiful designs, or beautiful ugly designs in Belgium, and that's our ugly Belgian houses. So in the next couple of minutes, I try to zoom in on those three topics. But first, I want to meet this very stereotype couple, Kim and Mike. I think they look from the States. They have 2 kids. They are currently living in an apartment, but the apartment is getting too small, so they bought a building lot in a very nice neighborhood, and they came to the architect and they said, okay, let's build our dream house. So first thing, you sit together with the architect, and the first thing that the architect wants to do is that he wants to build a house that is useful for that couple. So on one hand, we had, what was it, Kim and Mike? So we have Mike on one side, he wants an open kitchen and dark colors, and on the other hand, we have Kim, and she wants a kitchen island and very wide. So you already recognize this from the first kickoff meetings, I think, where 2 clients have one idea and you talk with them and they are telling completely different things. But then you go further into the project and you will find out that it's not only Kim and Mike, but they also had 2 kids, they have a dog, they have friends, they sometimes have their grandparents coming over to visit the children. They have also urban development, because you can't build whatever building these days in Belgium. And you have maybe the future buyers, which also are interesting, because if you're building a house, maybe you want to sell it one day, so it would be relevant if it also has some value at that time. So very important and quite logical if you are talking about architecture, that you look at all the stakeholders involved. Next, we also look at the context. For example, they want a south-facing garden, and there is a busy highway, so maybe we should have extra insulation. Would also be handy for the warm summers, and also for the noisy neighbors. Sometimes it's also an area where there are regular floods, so maybe we should have some barriers to protect us from that. So all those things are thought about when an architect builds a house. Yeah, sometimes I added this last minute because I like the picture. Yes, it's because if you add a house in a different context, then you have a lot of those examples in Antwerp, I believe, where you have a nice project, but put it in another context and it's looking quite weird, or some people like it. So this is in Antwerp, or Zun, is it somewhere, or in the Netherlands? Or sometimes the context also changes over time, and then you end up with things like this. I want now to explain how that principle of usefulness works with a case we did here at Studio Dott. So We worked a couple of years ago for Toontjeshuis, which is a concept where they built apartments and studios for people with a disability, so mental or physically challenged people. And we were there involved to try to empower the residents of Toontjeshuis to make them even more independent without sacrificing their privacy. So first thing we do, of course, we want to know the stakeholders, so we talked with a lot of people, not only the parents, not only the caretakers, but also the residents who will live there in the future. Some of them are also known from the program in VTM. Love is a couple program, no? I was also the only one who knew them. And then we found out that there, on one hand, we had the residents and they wanted to have that sense of safety without sacrificing, of course, their privacy and their independence. And on the other hand, we had the parents. They just wanted to be assured that if there would happen something, that they get a notification or are warned that there happened something with their children. So what we ended up with was a product definition, so a concept of a smart, we call a screen at the wall in those studios. But the interesting part was that the screen is connected with the domotica or the object in the room. So it was connected, for example, with the stove. So if somebody left on the stove for example, in this case, 20 minutes, you get a warning on the tablet saying, oh, the stove is still on, is it okay? Is it normal, or do you want to turn it off? So in first hand, the resident can turn it off themselves, nothing happens, and they just move on their lives. And they find this really interesting because it helps them without taking away their independence, because they can do it themselves. And it's just a helper, which is anonymous, that can provide that help for them. And then, if they don't react on it, and the stove isn't turned off after 1 hour, for example, we get a warning, so it's very clear for them. So this is a concept for all clarity, so it's not the final design. But then they get a warning, alarm goes off, and if they don't react at that point, it contacts automatically their parents, and they can interrupt in this case. Also, this contact, beautiful picture. In this case, we also mentioned that we should connect with WhatsApp because the parents told us that they are a little bit afraid of digital applications to install. So WhatsApp or FaceTime, that are things that they already understand how it works. So that way it can be really handy to just get a call and they can respond to it. So that was one concept to explain the first one, usability or the usefulness. Second one is durability. So if you build houses, we want them to last more than a lifetime. So buildings are there still. If we already are, if the builder is dead, the house is still there, I think, in many cases. So if we want to build a house, we want it to be also relevant in the future. So we want to solve also the problems of the future. So that's interesting also because when you are designing a house with an architect, you already think about, okay, maybe we want to get a second car because we move to the countryside, it's not close to everything, so maybe a second car would be handy, so maybe we need a garage, and that's future car may be electric also, and maybe we have a third child, so we can need maybe an extra room, and maybe an extra bathroom would be interesting. And I already said that an electric car would be interesting. So as an architect, it's also important, and of course for us also, that we look at the trends of tomorrow. So if they say we want an extra car, then maybe we think, okay, if they will buy a new car in 5 years, then it will be an electric one. So we already provide the electrical cables to the place where maybe afterwards a second garage can be built. So we don't need to add it the first time there, but we can already provide all the cables so that it can be added afterwards, and we don't need to open up the floor to add those cables later on. If we don't do that, we end up with our very known for the Flemish coterie, where we add up things on top of things. Another example, also from Ghent, sorry, but yeah, they're in the middle of the project, so the idea was that it would only be those arches, but in the middle of the project, some things happened, a lot of details, but they ended up with the final part being just one big box. An example of digital coterie for me is Microsoft Word. So it's an example of an application that has been there a long time, and there are added features on top of features. So in the end, you end up with a lot of tabs with below that a ribbon with a lot of buttons with options below it. So you need education to use Microsoft Word these days. So it would be good if they did a redesign these days. So what we do in digital products is that we look at, we try to prioritize. So we look at what can we implement today. So we want to build that house, that first house, and maybe we want to add the extra garage a few years later. So we already provide the foundations for that garage, and we already provide the cables for it. An example of that is Let's React. So we've been involved with Let's React also a long time. So that's for the people who don't know Let's React. It's a smart cone that helps athletes to monitor how they perform. So it measures the distance with athletes, if you tell it very simple, and you get a lot of data out of it. So we've been there a long time already, and we even made there the vision for the company, where we wanted to end up with. But one of the important things was that we already looked years ahead. And from the beginning, it was clear for us that we were designing that cone. So those two cones are also physically designed here in-house, and the applications and stuff like that also. But we were sure that in the beginning, we wanted to design those two cones, the physical ones. But we knew already that in a couple of years, the cones or the hardware may be obsolete, and we only have that digital platform, which will be the heart of Let's React. Because in the future, technology will evolve, and maybe we don't need that hardware anymore. So this is a picture during Corona of me trying to, this was the result of a roadmap workshop we did with the client. And I entered it in a long roadmap for Let's React. And then the third item is the beautifulness. So that's one of the frustrations again, because everybody thinks about design as, oh, it's only making things beautiful, like the left part of the group. And I was on the right-hand side saying, oh, it's not only picking colors, it's also designing and thinking, like the first 2 points. And I think that's a lot of, because of design with the big letter D. Maybe there are people in the room who like really a lot this design, but for me that's an example of a thing that's not very useful, but looks very well. I don't see myself using this. I think it will be a lot of clutter. But I think a lot of people who are not familiar with design think about design as this. But the other hand is also true. If you leave out the beautifulness out of a product, you end up with something like this. So Frank de Bozer had his last days at the VRT, and this is his website. So if we added a little bit of beautifulness to this, it could have a lot more impact than it has today, I think. So if there are UXers in the room, maybe propose to Frank. A very important thing about that beautifulness is that we depend largely on how it's implemented. So we don't have development in-house also, so it's important for us that we brief clearly how it should work and how it should look like, and brief that to developers. So like an architect makes his plans very detailed and a contractor can build it like that, we design the design system, we design the component library, so it's clear for developers how they should implement it. An example of this is Tengu. So Tengu is a very complex case, but it's, if you say it's really simple, a data plumbing platform, just basically connecting sensors with data warehouses. But it's in a very technological area, and adding there quite striking design, which is very different than what was already in the market, ended up making a real difference for them as a startup, to make a difference from other companies. We also there designed, of course, the design system, because they have a lot of developers in-house. We designed the design system, so they had the building blocks to continue working on the project if we were outside the picture. So, those were my 3 points. In a nutshell, if Uncle Mark, for example, asks again at the family party, what do you want to do, what do you do for a living, or maybe a client asks you, do we really need a designer in this process? We say that, of course, because we want to make useful things. We try to understand, first of all the stakeholders within the context of a project. Second, we look years ahead and define what we can build now and what can be added later or ever. And in the end, we turn all those insights into beautiful and feasible designs and instruct our builders to build it like we designed it. Voila. And maybe one last thought was that architect is always in the top 10 of most sexiest jobs in the world. So if we can make, and this initiative is a good thing for it, if we can spread the word about UX design, maybe digital product or whatever can be in the top 10 next year. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, thanks very much. And you're going to have to tell me, why did you think that the stock family photo was American?
Oh, who didn't thought it was American?
It's the teeth, right?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Okay. Mine are not quite as white.
Damn, I thought of all difficult questions, but this was the most difficult one.
I just had to know, I have to know. Does anyone have any real questions? Or does anyone have any stories about how difficult it is to tell your family about what you do?
Does your mom know what you do?
Yeah, the basics, I guess. So, but I understood that it's will be available on YouTube, so.
Just send it around, yeah. It's a resource. Sure.
It's actually funny because I made the same thought process, because I think it's a year ago or something. I did a talk about what UX design is learn from architects, because I also explained it to my mother that I'm like an architect, so I totally get where you're getting at now. Yeah.
I remember
Very
that.
logical.
Yeah. Easy leap. Yeah.
Do you have kids?
No.
Okay, because that's a real challenge. Kids at school sometimes have to explain what their parents do.
My daughter told me one time, she was like, when I grow up, I don't want to have a job like you. And I said, why? And she goes, this is what you do all day. I was like, yeah, that's no lie. Tap on a computer. All right, well, I am going to give you our commemorative patch. I don't know why we give out patches, but we always have. Nice. So, you can sew that on your motorcycle jacket or your 90s jean jacket.
Thanks.
But every speaker gets one. So thank you so much for enlightening us with your insights. And thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
So we'll have